Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we will be talking about the announcement of a Borderlands film, a film based on the Borderlands series of games, not anything else related to that. Because I know there's a television show called Into the Borderlands, but this is on the video game series, which just had its third installment last year, or technically actually fourth installment, because it had a pre-sequel, and this film is going to be directed by horror director Eli Roth. Now, this is I'm going to be very, very blunt about how I feel about this, and it's not because I have anything against Eli Roth or anything against the Borderlands franchise in and of itself, but this is a dumpster fire that's been soaked in gasoline that's just waiting for somebody to throw a lit cigarette back there or something to start the blaze. This could end horribly, and I have a funny feeling it probably will end horribly. But that's that's not really based on fact. That's just kind of based on a gut instinct in this situation. So to go through it a little bit, the first Borderlands really did not have. I played all three of the games, or the main games. The first Borderlands really doesn't have a whole lot of story. You do have some characters. They get a lot more development in the second game. I think that's honestly the strongest storytelling point you can possibly go with is the second game. The third game, the story is not as good. It's kind of subpar. It's a little weird. It kind of breaks some of the lore of the universe. So there's stuff in it with that, but going back to if you did something on the second game, I think you could make it work in a film format. Now, again, this is coming off of I know there's been a lot of talk about video games, video game movies specifically lately, the last couple of years. With we had Sonic, obviously, this past, I think, what was it, last weekend, I believe, was when it came out, and then also last year you had Detective Pikachu. Even though those are kind of connected to very big franchises that encompass more than video games, the characters themselves, or at least some of them, have been or started out very early in video games. So, I can kind of see where the appeal is broadened in those situations as opposed to this, which Borderlands really hasn't crossed into any other kind of media. Aside from the video game franchise, they haven't had any kind of a television show presence. There hasn't been any kind of like short animated films that have been released, at least not to my knowledge. And this is a jump right to a feature film. Now, I don't think that they can pull this off adequately because I think that they're still working the kinks out with this whole video games to movies thing. They've been trying to get it off the ground for 30 years. Who knows if they actually will ever get it off the ground, at least in full anyway, other than maybe the fact of, Detective Pikachu and Sonic being outliers in this kind of a situation where the majority of the video game to film adaptations fail. Now, like I said, that's working against it. The fact that the Borderlands franchise, the third game, did not sell particularly well. Honestly, I think if you were going to do a movie on this, you probably should have done it about 5 years ago. I think it was 5 years ago that the second game came out. Maybe it was a little before that. But about 5 years ago was when you were probably going to have the height of when you were going to have that movie come out. Because now you've gotten to a point where the third game was released and the third game was not as well received as the second game. I think it sold more units, but I think that ultimately the Gearbox wanted more out of that game. And the other thing was it didn't really, the game itself, the kind of one of the nuances of the game, which is another bit of a problem when adapting, especially when it's such a heavy crutch in terms of the universe, or not crutch, but a heavy presence in the universe, is the idea of all of these insane looking guns and, all the stuff you can do and everything like that. Because the thing is, if you're going to have a protagonist, what are you going to have them do? Some of these guns do zany things, and it's really cool in this universe because it's a fun game mechanic. But when you look at it from a film perspective, like, how are you going to work that out in some kind of a film if it's not, animated in the same style? That's the other thing, is the stylistic portion of it is Borderlands has a very stylized art style because of kind of that 3D cell shading type of look that they've kind of perfected. And it's going to be really hard in a film to kind of do this in some kind of live action format and still keep that aesthetic to a point where people can still recognize it as Borderlands. Because I think if it looks too real, I think you ruin the aesthetic. Borderlands in and of itself is a little cartoony, at least in the presentation. Um, Now, the other half of this news is obviously that Eli Roth has been contracted to direct the film. Now, I think a lot of people in the horror community know Eli Roth. He's responsible for movies like Hostel, Hostel 2, Cabin Fever, and I believe he also released The Green Inferno, was another one with him recently, even though I haven't seen that. But here's the thing, he's mostly known as a shock horror director, and I don't know if you can necessarily do shock horror in this scenario because it's really, Borderlands is supposed to be shockingly gory. So I get the idea that you got this guy because you think that he can handle it because of his love for gore and horror, and his willingness to kind of go the extra step in that way. So I like that in terms of the choice. But aside from that, Eli Roth is not a very accomplished director, even though this isn't obviously, even though Borderlands isn't necessarily highbrow material. I don't think he has enough experience in other genres outside of the horror genre to handle something like Borderlands, which has a very kind of quirky humor that somehow manages to work a lot of the time, at least in the in the early games. And you know, it's a particular way. I feel like one of the problems is that, or the reason why Borderlands works is because it's so zanily original in both the presentation and the tone and the way certain things worked. At least again when the games were coming out. Like I said, the third game, I did play it. It's kind of like but the whole thing is that you know, the tone of this type of a thing. If you mess with that, if you make it too serious at the wrong moment or too jokey at the wrong moment, then you kind of ruin the aesthetic. It's a very fine balance. And that's always what I kind of liked about it, was that you could go from these incredibly zany, like lunatic moments, and then go right over into something that's very serious and very emotionally invested. And it worked that way. I think that they're going to screw that up if they do that adaptation, if they don't have a very good writing team behind the film. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head who the person is that actually did or is in the process of writing the script for this film. But the other thing that kind of has me a little bit concerned is now Eli Roth has made a statement. I believe this was the Deadline, and basically it's about becoming the director for the Borderlands film. And I'm going to read this and then I'm going to kind of explain it a tiny bit because it's a little bit of I think it's a bit of a facade piece in the sense that this isn't genuine. This feels very much like a corporate type of thing. So now I'll read verbatim. So Eli Roth says, "I'm so excited to dive into the world of Borderlands, and I could not be doing it with a better script, production team, and studio. I have a long, successful history with Lionsgate. I feel like we have grown up together and that everything in my directing career has led to a project of this scale and ambition. I look forward to bringing my own energy, ideas, and vision to the wild, fun, and endlessly creative world of the game. Randy Pitchford and everyone at Gearbox have been incredibly supportive of my ideas. It really feels like a perfect storm of creators coming together. We are out to make a new classic, one which the fans of the game will love, but also one which will find a new audience globally." So again, that feels like a very, very, very prepared statement. He kisses Lionsgate's ass hardcore at the beginning of it because I believe, if I remember correctly, his last couple of films, if he did film with them or a subsidy of them, bombed horribly. So he's kissing Lionsgate's ass right out of the gate. It's blatantly obvious, not even trying to hide it. He might as well just put lipstick on the top part of that statement because that's basically what it is. And basically saying, all right, obviously thank you for having me come in and do all this. And then he also plugs Gearbox too, which because again they have a stake in this as well. So I'm assuming he's going to want to kiss their ass as well. So he kisses Gearbox's ass for the last part of this. and find a new audience globally. I mean, the game already has an audience globally. To be frank, I mean, it's the first again, excluding the third game. I didn't actually play the prequel game, although I heard that was good. But 3 out of the 4 games are pretty good, you know, and even the third, even the fourth game is, you know, okay, it's still functional. It's still fun to play because the mechanics are pretty good. But you know, they already have an audience, and the problem is trying to get that core audience that really loves those games and get them over into the theater. And that's going to be the main hurdle that Lionsgate is going to have in this type of a project, because again, people that love video games are very skeptical about video game films because there is not a very well proven track record of Hollywood getting them right. And starting from the beginning, I think the choices they've made runs this film down a path of, you know, this is probably going to be a segment on Rated R Riffs when it comes out, if it ever comes out. But this could be Doom. I should say this is probably going to have a bigger budget, so maybe not Doom Annihilation bad, but pretty close to that bad. If you know what I'm talking about. Look up Doom Annihilation if you don't know what I'm talking about, but just for God's sakes, don't watch the movie. It's horrible. So, you know, wrapping up at that, I think this is a dumpster fire waiting to happen, but I want to know what your opinion is. Do you agree with me on that, or do you think that you know, maybe this thing has a chance to do well, depending on what they choose to adapt and who they choose to come in and play various parts, and how Eli Roth handles this film? Now, I will say that I do know that Eli Roth has worked on some other films outside of the extreme gore horror genre, especially recently. So maybe I understand that he's branching out, but it's like maybe not this soon. Maybe give him something in the middle of the road first. But again, moving on from that, as usual, put your comments below. Again, I like to know what you're thinking. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?